Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Donald Trump and other leaders of the world's largest economies have gathered in Quebec City, Canada, for this year's G7 summit, with the U.S. president increasingly isolated over trade and climate change. The G7 meeting comes after President Trump ordered tariffs on imported steel and aluminum from Canada, Mexico, China, Japan, and the European Union, prompting world powers to talk of uniting against the U.S. in a trade war. Reuters quoted French President Emmanuel Macron as saying Thursday, "We don't mind being sick if needs be." Macron echoed that comment in a joint press conference with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
The 6 other countries of the G7 represent a larger market than the American market. Let's face it, there is no world hegemony if we find a way to organize ourselves, and we don't want there to be.
President Trump is scheduled to leave the G summit early ahead of next week's meeting in Singapore with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. With his early departure tomorrow morning, Trump will miss a discussion on climate change, which will center around Trump's decision to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accord. This comes as Trump said Thursday he's prepared to invite Kim Jong-un to the White House if next week's summit between the two leaders goes well. Federal agents arrested a former senior aide to the Senate Intelligence Committee Thursday, charging him with repeatedly lying to the FBI in a probe of who leaked classified information to reporters. The arrest of James Wolfe came just hours after the New York Times reported it had discovered federal agents had secretly captured years' worth of phone and email data from New York Times reporter Ali Watkins, who broke several high-profile stories related to the Intelligence Committee's work for the New York Times and other outlets. The Times reports Watkins and Wolfe previously had a 3-year romantic relationship. A New York Times spokesperson blasted the Trump administration's efforts to spy on its reporter, saying, quote, "Freedom of the press is a cornerstone of democracy, and communications between journalists and their sources demand protection," unquote. This all comes exactly 1 year after the Trump administration arrested former U.S. intelligence contractor Reality Lee Winner, who's accused of leaking a top-secret document claiming Russian military intelligence launched a cyber attack on at least one U.S. voting software company just days before the 2016 election. Reality Winner has pleaded not guilty and remains jailed awaiting trial. The Trump administration said Thursday it will not defend key parts of the Affordable Care Act as a number of states, led by Texas, challenge the constitutionality of President Obama's signature health care law. In court filings, Justice Department lawyers sided with the Republican-led effort to overturn the ACA in a move that would allow insurance companies to charge more or refuse coverage to people with pre-existing medical conditions. This came as the White House lobbied Republican congressional leaders to vote down a bipartisan bill that would fully fund an expansion of veterans' health care that Trump signed into law on Wednesday. On Capitol Hill, Senate Democrats are urging House Republican leaders to hold a vote on a bill that would reverse the FCC's repeal of net neutrality rules. Without congressional intervention, the FCC's new policy will go into effect Monday. It would allow Internet service providers, ISPs, to throttle Internet traffic speeds according to how much customers pay or based on which websites they wish to favor. Last month, the Senate voted 52 to 47 to reverse the FCC's rollback of net neutrality rules. On Thursday, the entire Senate Democratic caucus sent a letter to Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan demanding he bring a companion bill to the House floor. The Trump administration said Thursday it's transferring about 1,600 immigrants held in ICE custody to federal prisons in the first large-scale transfer of this kind. ICE told the Reuters news service it's moving the prisoners to 5 federal penitentiaries, with the majority headed to a prison complex in Victorville, California. Most of those being transferred have no criminal records and are awaiting civil immigration court proceedings. The Northwest Immigrant Rights Project reports up to 120 people being held at SeaTac Prison in Seattle are asylum seekers who are separated from their families. Meanwhile, a high school student from Iowa was found murdered in Mexico's Zacatecas state in May, just 3 weeks after he left the United States under threat of deportation. Manuel Antonio Cano Pacheco was found with his throat slit in what his family believes was a gang-related murder. He was just 19 years old. Cano Pacheco was brought to the U.S. when he was just 3. He'd previously been granted protected status under President Obama's Deferred Action or Childhood Arrivals program known as DACA, which President Trump has been working to phase out. After he was convicted of 2 minor drug charges, he lost his DACA status and chose to enter Mexico as deportation appeared likely. In Brooklyn, New York, immigrant rights groups and elected leaders are calling for the release of a delivery worker who was arrested by ICE last week after he dropped off a pizza at the Fort Hamilton Army base. Pablo Villavicencio, an Ecuadorian immigrant, presented his New York City-issued ID card to soldiers at the entrance to the base, as he's done on many previous delivery runs. But this time, he was denied access and told he needed a driver's license to enter the base. After a military police officer ran a background check, he discovered an ICE warrant from 2010 and called in immigration agents. Villavicencio is now being held at an ICE detention center in New Jersey and is scheduled to be deported. On Wednesday, New York City Council member Justice Brannon spoke to reporters outside the gates of the Army base, accompanied by Villavicencio's wife, Sandra Chica, and the couple's 2 young daughters.
Does the Army now have some new policy that demands all non-military personnel show proof of citizenship to gain access onto the Army base? Otherwise, what happened here? Is this part of some new Donald Trump deportation strategy? You're tearing families apart for what? How are we any safer today than we were yesterday?
It's cruel that they're gonna separate my daughters from him. He's supporting the family. Now I'm gonna be by myself, along with 2 kids.
On Thursday, scores of protesters gathered outside Immigration Court in Lower Manhattan chanting, "Free Pablo now." Meanwhile, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has said his office will pay Villavicencio's legal fees. In Nicaragua, hundreds of mothers marched to the streets of Managua Thursday, calling for justice for the more than 100 sons and daughters killed by police and vigilantes in recent protests, calling on President Daniel Ortega to resign. This is protester Ana Maria Pizarro.
Children are showing up having been tied up, tortured, and beaten up. And many times, after many days of complaining, the authorities call on mothers to collect the bodies. Official organizations should be giving information on victims from day one.
Britain's highest court ruled Thursday Northern Ireland's near-total ban on abortions is incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. The ruling by Britain's Supreme Court won't require a change in Northern Ireland's laws, but pro-choice activists say it's a step towards forcing the government of Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May to intervene. This is Grania Teggart, Northern Ireland campaigner for Amnesty International.
Theresa May must now demonstrate that, like us, she trusts all women in the UK and that she will end the inequity that women in Northern Ireland face. They should not have to travel to the rest of the UK for this health care. So we will continue to pressure our government to change the law to enable free, safe and legal abortions in Northern Ireland.
Ontario, Canada, voters have elected a new Conservative government led by Doug Ford, brother of the infamous former mayor of Toronto, Rob Ford, who died of cancer in 2016 after battling drug and alcohol addiction while in office. Doug Ford, who many have compared to Donald Trump, saw his Progressive Conservative Party win the most votes in provincial elections. Speaking on Democracy Now!, journalist Naomi Klein called Ontario's election the most important of her lifetime.
What's really, really worrying about this is that he's running on this platform to cut taxes in various ways, to cut corporate taxes, to cut individual income taxes, to do away with Ontario's cap and trade policies. And so it's a plan to blow a massive multi-billion-dollar hole in the budget, but he has refused to say how he will pay for it.
To see our full interview with Naomi Klein about Ontario's election, you can go to democracynow.org. New weather data show the month of May was the hottest ever recorded in the contiguous United States, with temperatures soaring more than 5 degrees Fahrenheit above 20th century averages. Climate scientists say May's heat toppled the previous record set in 1934 at the height of the Dust Bowl and is consistent with models for global warming. The record U.S. temperatures came as 2018 is on track to be Earth's 4th hottest year on record, while the 5 warmest years on record all have taken place since 2010. Celebrity chef and television presenter Anthony Bourdain has died by suicide. The 61-year-old man was found dead in his hotel room in Strasbourg, Germany, where he was filming an episode of his CNN program Parts Unknown. Anthony Bourdain's death came just days after fashion designer Kate Spade was found hanged to death in her Manhattan apartment in an apparent suicide as well. The high-profile suicides come as the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report the U.S. suicide rate has risen by over 25% over the past 2 decades. Topping the list is North Dakota, where suicides have risen by 57% from 1999 levels. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.